Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. In San Francisco, stocks edging higher despite concerns about fresh outbreaks of COVID-19 across the country. Meantime, a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court blocking the Trump administration's attempt to end DACA, a program protecting young immigrants in the United States. We'll get to that in a moment, along with Facebook taking down a Trump campaign re-election ad that contained a Nazi symbol. First, I want to get to the market moves, though. Small moves. Our Abigail Doolittle has been following them, as small as they have been. A day, Abigail, with low volume, not a lot of convictions. What are investors waiting for?
Really a snooze fest on the day, actually, Emily. Not a lot of volatility, even though there was a little bit of choppiness in there. And that's a great question. What are investors waiting for? Because last week, of course, we had those big 3 down days. Then we had 3 up days. So now stocks stuck in a bit of a range based on the fact that we are seeing a little bit of a haven bid amidst this for bonds and the yen. That may suggest that there's a little bit of a risk-off tone having to do with these virus numbers here in the United States. So I think that investors are waiting for a little more information around the virus. And are we going to see new epicenters that could rival what we had going on in New York a couple months ago, sadly, but now having moved past it. But again, could that be some sort of a slowing on the economy? And another tell to look at, Emily, and the possibility of a real risk-off tone, the dollar, because the dollar is up for a third day. That, of course, is a haven asset. And over the last 10 days, a really pretty solid bid from a technical standpoint. The Bloomberg dollar index back above its 200-day moving average. That's a long way of saying that long-term investors like the dollar again. We could just see it keep climbing. If that happens, in the past, that has pressured stocks, so it could really set a bit of a risk-off tone. And again, if I had to take a guess, I would say at this point, maybe around virus concerns.
A small move for Facebook as well today, ending the day just slightly up. Facebook took down a Trump campaign re-election ad that contained a Nazi-leaning symbol. Of course, Facebook has been in the spotlight about how it handles these issues. There are calls from civil rights groups to advertisers to pull their money from Facebook in the month of July. Is this affecting the stock at all?
Big headline, but not so much on the stock. That said, Facebook did have a fairly volatile day, especially on a relative basis, because at the lows it had been down more than 1% in the morning. But at the end of the day, as you're saying, not a lot of movement. Lots of movement, though, on the year, because on the year, at one point, the stock was down sharply in March. Now, overall, up about 15%. And this has to do with the the March quarter that they reported, not as bad as expected. As you know, Emily, there was lots of fears that there could be a situation for these social media companies that advertising wouldn't come through from autos and travel. And that was the case, but it was made up for by e-commerce. Plus, numbers were taken in. Looking ahead, it seems that, I had an interesting conversation today with BI analyst Jitendra Warral, and he was telling me that he thinks over the next 5 years, this is the social media company that will outperform the most from a growth perspective, mainly because it sounds like they may see a bit of a shift in their business model, moving away from dependency on the advertising toward e-commerce and payments. And as you know, they have a huge platform to really potentially make that happen. In the near term, it could be a little bit rocky, as it has been this year. Over the long term, though, it seems as though they have a pretty bright future. Regulation, of course, Emily, one of the big risks there. And it's going to be very interesting to see what Jeff Bezos says to Congress in July. And perhaps Mark Zuckerberg will join as well. We don't know that, but that could be something else that could move the stock in the next month or so.
Right. And Abigail, Facebook has said that Mark Zuckerberg will testify if he is called. So that is something we'll definitely continue to follow. Don't know yet if he will be called. That is now the outstanding question. Abigail, thank you so much for joining us. All right, in other big news, a divided Supreme Court has ruled that President Trump cannot end the Obama-era program that shields hundreds of thousands of young, undocumented immigrants from deportation. The justices rejected administration arguments that the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program is illegal. DACA protects people who were brought into this country illegally as children. The president tweeting that this is a horrible and politically charged decision. To discuss, we are joined now by Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us. So important to have your voice here today on of all days. Really momentous decision here by the Supreme Court with Chief Justice Roberts siding with the liberal wing of the court. What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, second time in a week, and it's a really big deal because the Supreme Court is showing its independence and that it will stand up for the rule of law and for fairness, and this produces the most just result. It's the fairest result to make sure that all of these young people have a chance to continue in this country and contribute as they have.
That said, the president is saying this is a political decision, not a legal decision. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think he's wrong about that, dead wrong. The fact is the decision is very similar to the court's decision on the citizenship question. The Trump administration and its policy about immigration generally is basically cruel and pointless, and they have failed to offer any reason why it makes any sense at all to deport something more than 800,000 people who are studying here, working here, raising families here, contributing to our economy. It makes no sense at all, and they didn't give a good reason. And because they failed to give a good reason, there was nothing to support their move to cancel this policy. And so the justices sent it back to the lower court and said, not good enough, you can't give a good reason, and we can't support this policy.
Apple CEO Tim Cook is one of the executives who had come out in support of DACA in the past. Apple employs a number of these so-called dreamers. What does this mean for the immigrant community right now at a time when, we're in the middle of a health crisis and an economic crisis and millions of people who are out of work?
It means that people can breathe a little bit easier. Now, you never know with respect to this president. The Trump administration has declared war on America's immigrants. But it's very clear that not just Apple, but many companies, many employers, large and small, can depend on these workers, that they'll be here for a while longer. We need to make these protections permanent, which is why I'm using guarded language here, where we have to make sure that these protections become permanent. But the fact is that our economy can depend on these people, and that's really important at a time when economically we have serious headwinds and businesses large and small have serious challenges. Knowing that our workforce and this part of our workforce will be there is huge.
Right. As you allude to there, the Trump administration could bring this argument again, though they've been told the argument needs to be better if they have a hope of making that argument. Meantime, as you, alluded to the social crisis that we are also currently facing in this country, the deaths of George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks. I'm curious how this has you considering or reflecting on how you enforce the law in your state without resorting to violence.
Yeah, I think this is about fairness and about human beings and people that are contributing to our society, to our economy. Dreamers are a really important part of our social fabric, and to go after them and to cater to the president's hateful and bigoted base, really hurts this country in the same way that failing to address systemic and institutional racism and bias and the death of George Floyd and the tremendous pain and suffering that we're feeling across the country does great damage to this country. And I think these two issues are linked because at the end of the day, it's what's needed is leadership from the president, from Washington, that brings us together to confront these major social, political, and economic issues so we can all move forward together. He's failing to do that. I hope we can do better in the months and years to come.
Do you see a need for police reform in Connecticut and beyond?
I see it everywhere. What I've said is that the pain and suffering that George Floyd's family is feeling and experiencing and their community in Minnesota is felt across the country. We've had instances of law enforcement misconduct and brutality in Connecticut. We know this pain and suffering too, and in Connecticut, we're trying to confront all these issues, and we've got to do it quickly and comprehensively. Nobody's immune from this. No state is immune from these challenges, and we've got to confront them head on.
We know now that the DOJ, the House are considering antitrust probes into big tech, which is something that we cover on this show, companies like Apple, Alphabet, Facebook, Amazon. I'm curious where your office stands on big tech and whether or not you have taken a position yet on whether big tech needs to be broken up and if this is something that you're exploring.
The attorneys general across the country actually have been leading on antitrust enforcement and investigations. We have a 50-state investigation now active and pending against Google and looking into whether Google has unlawfully used its market power, particularly in the digital advertising space. We have been active with respect to Facebook as well. And in the past, there have been multi-state investigations and enforcement actions against Apple. Connecticut in particular, is a big player in the privacy space. We were a leader in the Equifax data breach and in reaching that historic largest ever settlement for a data breach and privacy breach. And as you may know, in the antitrust space, I'm leading the national generic drug price fixing case. We just announced our third huge complaint to confront rampant and brazen price fixing in the generic drug industry, what I've called the largest corporate cartel in history.
So when it comes to, given that, the Google investigation is potentially more advanced, when you look at some of these other tech companies, especially given your work on pharmaceutical companies as well, what do you think the problem is with a company like Facebook, with a company like Apple and Amazon? I mean, they're all very different companies, but they all, in many cases dominate the markets that they are in. And do they dominate to the extent that they are monopolies?
Right. And the question is whether they're monopolies and whether and how dominant they are and whether they use that monopoly power and market dominance to prejudice their competitors and to prejudice their customers and consumers. And we have very real concerns that that's happening. And that's why we're investigating the major technology companies. One of the ironies is, the watershed moment in antitrust enforcement in the last 30 years was the antitrust case against Microsoft many years ago, now almost a generation ago. And what's interesting about that case is if we had not taken action as a country against Microsoft at that time, there probably wouldn't be a Google or a Facebook. We had to make sure that Microsoft was honoring its obligations under the law and wasn't misusing or abusing its market power to squelch innovation and competition. And because we took that action, there was more competition, more innovation. And now these companies, which were the startups of a generation ago, are now the big monoliths, and we have to take a look at them as well.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll be following what action your office takes. Connecticut Attorney General William Tong, thank you so much for joining us. All right, coming up, as the global race to 5G continues, Legato is one company promising to bring the latest and greatest 5G technology to the industrial sector. We're going to talk to the company's CEO next. This is Bloomberg. In April, the FCC unanimously approved Legato's request to use its spectrum to build new industrial 5G networks for critical infrastructure companies across the United States. We're talking about transportation companies, public safety companies, energy companies. This decision puts the U.S. a step closer to China in the race for 5G. However, Tuesday, the Commerce and Transportation Departments told lawmakers that they opposed Legato's proposed service. The Pentagon does as well. Joining us now, the CEO of Legato, Doug Smith. And Doug, you have the Commerce Department, the Transportation Department, and even the Pentagon saying they're concerned that this would disrupt GPS signals needed for defense, needed for aviation safety. The airlines also concerned about this. Why are all of them, these executive agencies, wrong?
Well, Emily, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be able to come and talk on your show about this. We are thrilled that we have the approval that you mentioned. So in April, the FCC approved our petition for a license. It was an approval that came with unanimous support from the commissioner. So it was a 5-0 vote from the commissioners, had bipartisan support. And this, as you said, really is a step for our country towards 5G. And so we're thrilled with that. I certainly understand that some folks are still resistant to the idea. But I think the record that the FCC has here really speaks for itself, which is this was a data-based decision, and they made the right decision.
So then give me the data-based and technological argument here. Why do you believe that this is safe? Why do you believe this won't interfere with GPS and compromise our defense and airline safety?
Sure, I believe it's safe because I've spent years looking at this. I'm an engineer of 30 years. I'm also a pilot. Really care a lot about aviation and understand that space. We've spent several years. This has been an application that's been pending at the FCC for well over 4 years. And during that 4 years, we've analyzed, we've tested, we've done more testing on the spectrum than I've ever seen in the industry on any block of spectrum. And all the data comes back and supports the decision that the FCC made. Now, along the way, to ensure that we protected GPS, we made a lot of decisions and we made a lot of changes to the application itself. We're talking about power levels and the things that have to do with interference. We've addressed them all, and we worked hand in hand with the federal agencies to understand their concerns. We worked at the FCC to do the same, and I believe the package that we've come up with, it addresses the interference. I'm sure of it.
Now, speaking of addressing the interference, I know that there are these safeguards that you intend to put in place in case of interference, but I'm curious if one of those safeguards is to turn off or turn down the service where it's found to be causing interference. Isn't that a problem in and of itself?
Well, I think what you should take away from that is that's the confidence that I have that we have solved the interference issue. And so what you're referring to is a clause in the approval that says if there is interference, that the FCC has all the actions that it needs to address it, including having us turn off our network. And so what you should take from this is that I am so confident that we are not going to cause interference that we've agreed to that provision.
So when do you intend to begin service?
So that's the exciting part. We are very focused right now on developing the 5G technologies. We've been a satellite provider and of critical communications for over 25 years. And so right now we're really focused on building 5G services on our satellite and on our ground-based networks. The approval that we're talking about here enables us to build them on a ground-based network. And so what we're doing is we're doing all the technology development, and we're working through making sure that we have devices that will support 5G that will connect to both our satellites and our ground-based networks so that we can bring all these fantastic services to market.
All right. Well, we'll be watching how this debate continues to develop. Doug Smith, the CEO of Legato, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
All right. Coming up, Tesla's board members now under fire for allegedly wasting corporate resources in exchange for massive pay awards. That story next. This is Bloomberg. A pension fund has launched a lawsuit against Tesla directors, including CEO Elon Musk and Oracle founder Larry Ellison, claiming they improperly siphoned hundreds of millions of dollars out of the company's assets to pocket high compensation. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Dana Hull, who covers Tesla for us. Dana, what exactly is the allegation here, and how important is this accusation?
Well, there are a lot of lawsuits involving Tesla, of course, but this is one by, like a fairly large pension fund, and it just kind of comes at a time when, the governance is top of mind as the company prepares for its annual general meeting. This is a pension fund representing Detroit police and firefighters, and in a lawsuit filed Wednesday in Delaware, they basically just said that the board is using their positions to enrich themselves at the company's expense, and that they've granted themselves millions in compensation, and and some of them don't even actually go to all the meetings. I mean, this has been something that we've seen in some of the proxy advisory firm reports that have come out of late. So it's just, there's always drama at Tesla. Corporate governance is always kind of an issue. It tends to rear its head right around the time of the general meeting, and we're just sort of seeing this come yet again.
What is Tesla or have any of the board members made a statement or a response?
No. I mean, this is a lawsuit that was filed yesterday, and our legal colleague wrote a story about it, but we haven't seen any kind of statement or response from Tesla today at all.
So, do you expect that this could impact the board longer term? I mean, could it lead to another board shakeup? As we know, there have been several board shakeups over the years at Tesla.
I think it's a tricky thing. I mean, on the one hand, there are, investors, including pension funds, that have been pushing for changes to corporate governance for quite some time. We saw that a lot in the wake of the go private tweet and the SEC settlement, and Tesla has taken steps to add more independent directors. But at the same time, the stock is doing incredibly well. It closed above $1,000 yet again. And so average shareholder is looking at that stock price and they're very happy. So it's hard for me to imagine that all of a sudden you're going to have a revolt of shareholders sort of demanding that Robin Denholm or Larry Ellison resign from the board when the company, from a stockholder perspective, has done extraordinarily well in 2020.
Right. And quickly, I mean, Tesla's always been, you've got these fervent bulls and bears. I mean, do you expect that any of those who are optimistic about Tesla, that they would actually be swayed in terms of investors by these kind of corporate governance issues?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the bottom line is that the shareholders who care the most about corporate governance tend to be fairly small shareholders, and the large shareholders have known about Tesla's corporate governance issues for years and have tend to be long-term investors that have always stood by the company. You've not ever seen kind of a critical mass of large holders get up in arms about this.
All right, Bloomberg's Dana Hall covering Tesla for us. Dana, as always, thanks so much for bringing us that update. All right, coming up, website security provider Cloudflare has seen a surge in cyber attacks on anti-racist organizations since the death of George Floyd. CEO Matthew Prince will join us next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. As the 2020 election cycle heats up, network security firm Cloudflare says it's blocking 400,000 attacks on political campaigns on a typical day, and up to 4 million such attacks on a busy day. Joining us now to discuss, Cloudflare co-founder and CEO Matthew Prince. Matthew, good to have you back on the show. First of all, shares up 100% since March. Obviously, Cloudflare has been a critical company, part of our critical infrastructure to keep everyone online as we've all been working from home and sheltering from place. Talk to us about what demand and traffic has been like in the pandemic.
We obviously the superheroes of this crisis are going to be the medical professionals and scientists that are taking care of the sick and helping look for a cure. But we feel really proud that we are one of the guardians of the internet, and the internet has been one of the faithful guardians that has allowed us to continue to get through this. And so we've seen around the world as much as a 50% increase in overall internet utilization. And our team is hard at work making sure that we are able to keep normal traffic under control, but we've also seen a just dramatic spike in cyber attacks over the same period of time. And so we're ensuring that all of our customers and clients stay online no matter what.
Do you think this boost is temporary because we are sheltering in place, and what happens in the new normal when people start to go back to work and school, albeit slowly?
Well, I think that the first systemic change is going to be that now that the world has learned more how to work remotely, that I think that's something that employees are going to demand across companies, and it's going to accelerate a lot of companies' digital transformation. So I think us relying on the internet to get work done across the globe is something that is likely here to stay. We have seen a plateauing in the overall normal internet usage. I think the cyber attacks are two different trends, one of which is less concerning than the other. We always see an uptick in cyber attacks as school lets out, and so we saw a bunch of what were largely bored kids launching relatively unsophisticated attacks. But we have, over the course of the last month, seen an increase in much more sophisticated attacks that appear to be coming from nation-state actors, sometimes targeting health infrastructure, sometimes targeting election infrastructure, and that has us more concerned. And unfortunately, I think that those sorts of actors are taking advantage of any crisis that they can see, and that's why having a system like Cloudflare in place is so incredibly important for anyone that is providing a critical service like healthcare or elections.
Earlier this week, Mark Zuckerberg announced a big voter information campaign that they're launching to register new voters, as well as, the latest efforts that they've been making to safeguard the integrity of the platform and protect it from interference in the election. All of that said, how concerned are you about interference in the 2020 presidential election, just based on the number of attacks that you're seeing on a regular basis?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that we risk turning U.S. elections into the World Cup of cyber attacks after the rest of the world saw how vulnerable parts of our election infrastructure were in 2016. And so that's something that we are very much in touch with, and we have been working since 2016 with what we call the Athenian Project to help any state, local, or federal officials that are conducting elections. And one of the things that I'm proud of is we actually worked with the Federal Election Commission in order to be able to not just protect the election infrastructure, but actually be able to protect any campaign as well. And we provide all of these services at no cost because there's no way we could have built Cloudflare without a stable and functioning political system. And I think it's our duty as a technology company to be giving back and helping ensure that we can protect that political system and make sure that it continues to work going forward.
Meantime, you've also seen a large uptick in cyber attacks, particularly on advocacy organizations focused on anti-racism. What are you seeing in terms of the traffic and the severity of these attacks, and what are you doing to help mitigate it?
Yeah, unfortunately, the internet used to be a place where anyone could use the platform to get out important messages, and advocacy organizations really flourished in the time of the internet. What's unfortunately happened is, as there are people who want to silence those organizations, they're using cyber attacks, things like denial of service attacks, to knock them offline. And so disturbingly, as we all saw, incredibly horrific images of violence against Black communities on television. Online, we were seeing massive attacks against various organizations that were fighting for equality, that were fighting for human rights. And we saw over 1,000 times increase in the number of cyber attacks that those organizations were facing. And so we have, for several years now, over 6 years, provided something called Project Galileo, which provides their services for free to either politically or artistically important organizations. And we've been onboarding several of these human rights organizations over the course of the last several weeks, and stand ready to throw our full weight in services to make sure that they can stay online and get their important messages out.
Meantime, Cloudflare has faced some controversies of its own. Even as you work to protect some of these vulnerable organizations, you've been criticized for servicing hateful organizations, which, believe it or not, they have websites of their own. And I know that this is something that you have personally struggled with in wanting to be a neutral provider of services for people who use the internet. And I'm curious if any of the recent events have changed how you're thinking about this and your reflections on what your business practices should be going forward?
I think that we have a duty to make sure that we protect the people who are fighting for civil liberties and civil rights online. But I think that it's and we've been very careful as we do that to recognize that we are computer scientists, not political scientists, and so we actually work with multiple different civil society organizations to identify who the good guys are, because we don't trust ourselves to be the ones that say, this content is politically or artistically important. I think the same risk comes when someone who's a deep infrastructure company like Cloudflare is making determinations on who the bad guys are online as well. And so while there are plenty of things that use our services, we see now nearly 13% of all of the web passing through our network, and so there's amazing things that use us, but there's also things that I would rather not use us. I think it's very dangerous for infrastructure companies that are hidden and invisible behind the scenes to be quietly making parts of the internet disappear. Again, I think before cyber attacks took off like they did, the internet was a place where anyone could put an idea up online, and that was how the internet worked. Now that cyber attacks are there, by pulling away a service like Cloudflare, what you're effectively saying is that bullies and criminals that launch those attacks should be able to silence one side of a debate or another, and that's something that we think is not the right place for us to be making determinations.
All right, Cloudflare co-founder and CEO Matthew Prince, good to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, coming up, some lawmakers and now the Department of Justice proposing to roll back legal protections for internet platforms and how they moderate their content. This as companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter rush to monitor dis and misinformation on their sites. We'll catch up with Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn next. This is Bloomberg. The Justice Department is outlining a broad overhaul of legal protections for internet platforms like Google and Facebook if they deliberately promote illegal speech on their website. Senator Marsha Blackburn, a Republican from Tennessee, one of the lawmakers calling to roll back these now controversial protections under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. She spoke with Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli in Washington.
It is time for Congress to do something about privacy, data mining, Section 230. You and I have been talking about this for years now. And this is Congress's responsibility to put the rules of the road in place. Here is the problem, is you have these big tech companies that are hiding behind a shield that was put in place when they were little bitty just starting out. When they had users that were reposting content. Now, what have these big tech social media companies done? They've developed news streams. But do they want to play by the rules like Bloomberg does? The answer is no. But they turn around and they make a decision that the Federalist, which is conservative content, which they don't like, it doesn't fit their political philosophy. So they go to the comment section for third-party postings on that, and then they say we're going to disallow this and not have that engagement. Here's the problem. What has social media told us since its infancy? They've said, we're the public square. We have been saying to them, well, the public square has a cop on the beat to keep order. They don't want a cop on the beat. You look at YouTube, they let that run wild. You look at things like the Federalist, and they want to go in and they want to take down third-party comments. That participation in public discourse.
Well, let me ask you about this, because so many lawmakers on the left and the right have raised concerns about breaking up big tech. But what can actually get done? When you're talking to President Trump, what do you say realistically here's what should be done?
Right, and when I talk to President Trump, what I've discussed is let's not do away with Section 230, let's reform Section 230. What we need to do is set a threshold. If you are 50 million users and less, you have Section 230 protections. If you are more than 50 million users, you're not going to have those Section 230 protections. Also, let's look at these terms. The terms inside 230 are overly broad. Free speech, political speech, should be protected. But when you talk about abusive or unlawful, let's look at what these terms are and put more definition into what this is supposed to mean. Overly broad terms end up being ripe for abuse.
And meanwhile,
let's put that definition in.
Who should take the lead on this? Should it be Commerce? Should it be another agency? Who should be taking the lead on this?
It should be Judiciary and Commerce.
Okay.
They're going to have different components of this bill, but it will be Chairman Graham, Chairman Wicker, working with those of us at the Tech Task Force and addressing this. We've been ready to move forward on this. The Browser Act is there to address privacy, giving you the ability to opt in to shield your personal information to determine what you want the platform to have access to, giving you that first right on opting in or opting out. That ought not to be the prerogative of the platform.
I want to go geopolitical for a second, because
Sure.
we can talk about domestic politics and which news sites are conservative and which sites are liberal, but China has really been also making a play for these big tech companies, and they have been less reactionary than lawmakers in both parties would like. So how does this factor in when you see China playing a role here?
Well, China has been in the middle of this from day one. And they like the coziness with big tech, and they continue to push that. And they're doing it for a couple of reasons. When you look at sites like TikTok, what is TikTok trying to do? They want to capture those images. And when you look at some of these sites where you put in your picture and it ages you or changes you or whatever, what are they doing? They are capturing and holding your image. They're building a database on you. And you and I've talked many times about who owns the virtual you, which is one of the questions I think everybody should be asking when they're talking about their presence online. China wants to own the virtual you. They want to be able to replicate you online. And through these social media apps and sites, that is how they're doing it. Huawei is a way that they're doing it, trying to get into debt diplomacy with all of these different countries and saying, hey, we will provide you with a 5G network. We will provide you with smart city technology. And by the way, we own the data.
Senator Marsha Blackburn there with our own Kevin Cirilli. Turning back to that Facebook story we talked to you about earlier in the show, Facebook has removed a series of ads from President Trump's re-election campaign for violating the company's policy against organized hate. The social network has been criticized for not fact-checking political ads, for taking political ad dollars at all, but just this week said they would allow users to turn off political ads if they don't want to see them. Joining us now to discuss, Brandy Dexter, Senior Campaign Director at Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. And Brandy, I know that you and your organization have been very vocal about the situation that Facebook now finds itself in, including in calling for advertisers to boycott Facebook for the month of July. I'm curious, first of all, for your thoughts on this latest development that Facebook has taken down these ads, these most recent ads from the Trump campaign down. They contained a Nazi-leaning symbol.
Yes. Hi. First of all, thank you for having me. I guess I'm relieved that maybe there's some bounds and some integrity that Facebook is willing to show when it comes to unraigned terrorism and disinformation on their platform. However, that is not enough. We've seen a lot of ways in which they have failed the process of democracy, the ways in which they've let white nationalist groups thrive on their platform, the ways in which they've allowed hate speech and a number of issues and have like censored activists, and the ways in which they've shown time and time again that when it actually comes to ensuring that their platform can be used as a free marketplace of ideas, they're actually not willing to do what it takes to ensure that people are safe on and offline. So it's good that they made this one step, but they have so much further to go, and they know it.
You're calling on advertisers to halt ad buys on Facebook in July, and you say that companies don't do this will be, quote, staying silent in what has finally become a global charge to end anti-Blackness in every setting of our lives. Why do you think advertisers should be doing this, and what's the reaction you've gotten from advertisers so far?
Yes, so I think what we're dealing with right now is this moment globally where people are paying attention to the role of corporations in our lives, whether you're talking about Facebook or any other corporation. And when corporations come out and they say Black Lives Matter, and they put that on their, Twitter account, and they release statements, but when you pop the hood, what you find is that their hiring practices are shaky, that people are enduring discrimination and racist behavior within their companies. And when you see that they're still willing to put down a lot of money on a platform that is well established as a place of hate and violence, not just in the US, not just for Black folks, but globally to a number of different communities. We don't think it's that much to ask that they really put their money where their mouth is. If you care about Black lives, this is one way that you could do this right now.
Now, you've been involved in a number of successful accountability campaigns, getting Bill O'Reilly's show taken off the air at Fox, getting R. Kelly dropped from RCA. What do you actually want Facebook to do here? Like, what would accountability actually look like to you?
I think there's a lot of layers to that. We have been working with Facebook for years on a civil rights audit. In the next few weeks, they will drop their final installment, laying out the changes that they've made and the changes that they've yet to make, and their intentions on how they're going to ensure their platform is safe. We've consistently called for permanent civil rights infrastructure that is really looking at the harms in their platform across all different planks, not just from a policy standpoint, but implementation, engineering, product, et cetera. And so we want to see that they have a permanent skin in the game when it comes to ensuring that people are safe. But we're also quite clear that we're not going to fully get there when left in the hands of a corporation. It's always going to be one step forward, two steps back. And for everything we know, there's a lot we don't. And so we're calling for government regulation. We think there's a huge role to play right now for government. And so nothing short of regulation, breakup, we've called for a data protection agency, a number of different things will actually get us to the Facebook that I think everybody in the world deserves.
So what kind of regulation are you calling for? I mean, you think Facebook should be broken up, and how?
Yeah, I mean, what we could start with spinning off WhatsApp and Instagram, or even just banning their ability to do mergers when they've, or to get new companies when they've already shown to be a bad actor. I think it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest, that last year they received the largest fine in history of the FTC, billions of dollars in fines for bad behavior. And then this year, within the last month, they've been able to acquire Giphy. They've been able to sort of continue on their merry way. We would like to see more from the FTC. We, again, have called for a data protection agency and an entity. I think it's clear in government that there's not enough sort of expertise, knowledge, and resources to really deal with what we're seeing unfold across social media platforms. And so we've joined Congresswoman Gillibrand in calling for a data protection agency. I also think that we need to have stronger privacy regulation. Once upon a time, the FCC passed one of the strongest privacy rules of the road that we've ever seen. And immediately that was blown up by Congress. And so we think they can go back to the drawing board and really start to deal with third-party data mining companies, ensure our privacy. There's a number of things that we could see government do in this moment.
Now, I know that representatives from your organization have been on calls with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, and I imagine if he was here, he would bring up the good that he believes that Facebook has done in the world, including in helping to add momentum to movements like the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, without social media, many people wouldn't necessarily be aware of what happened to George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks. And that kind of situation went viral so quickly, in part because of what Facebook and companies like Twitter have built. How do you balance the potential good that Facebook has done for social justice with the bad?
So first of all, I want to be clear. I think people have done work for social justice. And so whether it's people using the tools at our disposal to show what's happening to us, organizing globally through a number of different channels, really working to center justice in our fights. It's the people power, whether you're talking about here, whether you're talking about Ukraine, India, or any number of places where we're fighting for freedom. The platforms have been helpful, yes, in the initial days. However, what we've seen over time, as more and more it's become about access to ad data, about, understanding so much about our lives, around, having a large data footprint, whether you're on their platform or not. We've seen a lot of ways in which democracy has been broken in the Philippines, in the US, in Brazil, in a number of spaces. We've seen so many problems, and we've seen them turn a blind eye, even when they're handed information from people within their own companies. And so do I think that technology is great and wonderful and progress is great and we should invest in great technology? Yes. Do I think that tech companies or CEOs, any corporation or anyone should be able to operate without any level of accountability or integrity? No, I don't. And I think we've seen with Facebook and other tech companies that they can't be trusted.
All right. Brandy Collins, Dexter, Color of Change, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective with us. We'll continue to cover these issues and hold companies accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is next. Stay tuned.